Welcome to Fireside Reads with Mara Hopewell. Tonight, we'll be reading Yes to Life by Viktor E. Frankl. Introduction, Part 2 by Daniel Goleman. Frankl's main contribution to the world of psychotherapy was what he called logotherapy, which treats psychological problems by helping people find meaning in their lives. Rather than just seeking happiness, he proposed we can seek a sense of purpose that life offers us. Happiness in itself does not qualify as such a purpose. Pleasures do not give our life meaning. In contrast, he points out that even the dark and joyless episodes of our lives can be times when we mature and find meaning. He even posits that the more difficult, the more meaningful troubles and challenges can be. How we deal with the tough parts of our lives, he observes, shows who we are. If we can't change our fate, at least we can accept it, adapt, and possibly undergo inner growth, even in the midst of troubles. This approach was part of a school known as existential therapy, which addresses the larger issues of life, like dealing with suffering and dying. All of which Frankl argued are better handled when a person has a clear sense of purpose. Existential therapies, including Frankl's version, blossom particularly as part of the humanistic psychology movement that peaked in the 1970s and continued in successive decades. To be sure, a robust lineage of logotherapy and existential analysis continues to this day. There are three main ways people find fulfillment of their life meaning, in Frankl's view. First, there's action, such as creating a work, whether art or a labor of love, something that outlasts us and continues to have an impact. Second, he says meaning can be found in appreciating nature, works of art, or simply loving people. Frankl cites Kierkegaard that the door to happiness always opens outward. The third lies in how a person adapts and reacts to unavoidable limits on their life possibilities, such as facing their own death or enduring a dreadful fate like the concentration camps. In short, our lives can take on meaning through our actions, through loving and through suffering. Here I'm reminded of life advice from the Dalai Lama on the occasion of his 18th birthday, when I wrote A Force for Good, the Dalai Lama's vision for our world. First, he recommended gain some internal control over your own mind and how you react to life's difficulties. Then, adopt an ethic of compassion and altruism, the urge to help others. Finally, act on that outlook in whatever ways your life offers. Frankl cites a converging formulation from Rabbi Hillel almost 2,000 years ago. This translation I know best goes, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm not for others, what am I? And if not now, when? For Frankl, this suggests that each of us has our unique life purpose. For Frankl, this suggests that each of us has our unique life purpose and that serving others ennobles it. The scope and range of our actions matter less than how well we respond to the specific demands of our life circle. A common thread in these desperate words of wisdom comes down to the ways we respond to life's realities, moment to moment, in the here and now, as revealing our purpose in ethics of everyday life. Our lives continuously pose the question of our life's meaning, a query we answer by how we respond to life. To be sure, Frankl saw human frailty too. Each of us, he notes, is imperfect, but imperfect in our own way. He put a positive spin on this too, concluding that our unique strengths and weaknesses make each of us uniquely irreplaceable. The great majority of those who, like Frankl, were liberated from Nazi concentration camps chose to leave for other countries rather than return to their former homes, where far too many neighbors had turned murderous. But Viktor Frankl chose to stay in his native Vienna after being freed and became head of neurology at a main hospital in Vienna. The Austrians he lived among often perplexed Frankl by saying they did not know a thing about the horrors of the camps he had barely survived. For Frankl, though, this alibi seemed flimsy. These people, he felt, had chosen not to know. Another survivor of the Nazis, the social psychologist Erwin Staub, was saved from a certain death by a Raoul Wallenberg, the diplomat who made Swedish passports for thousands of desperate Hungarians, keeping them safe from the Nazis. Staub studied cruelty and hatred, and he found one of the roots of such evil to be the turning away, choosing not to see or know a bystanders. That not knowing was read by perpetrators as a tacit approval, but if instead witnesses spoke up in protest of evil Staub saw, it made such acts more difficult for evildoers. For Frankl, the not knowing he encountered in post-war Vienna was regarding the Nazi death camps scattered throughout that short-lived empire and the obliviousness of Viennese citizens to the fate of their own neighbors who were imprisoned and died in those camps. The underlying motive for not knowing, he points out, is to escape any sense of responsibility or guilt for those crimes. People in general, he saw, have been encouraged by their authoritarian rulers not to know. A fact of life today as well. That same plea of innocence, I had no idea, has contemporary resonance in the emergence of an integrational tension. Young people around the world are angry at older generations for leaving as a legacy to them a ruined planet, one where the momentum of environmental destruction will go on for decades, if not centuries. This environmental not knowing has gone on for centuries, since the Industrial Revolution. Since then, we have seen the invention of countless manufacturing platforms and processes, most of all, which came to be in an era when we had no idea of their ecological impacts. Advances in science and technology are making ecological impacts more transparent, and so creating options that addresses the climate crisis and hopefully will be pursued across the globe and over generations. Such disruptive, truly green alternatives are one way to lessen the bleakness of Earth 2.0. The planet in future decades, a compelling fact of life for today's young. Where Frankl was us today, he died in 1997. He would no doubt be pleased that so many of today's younger people are choosing to know and are finding purpose and meaning in surfacing environmental facts and acting on it. In light of the wholesale madness of that afflicted too much of the civilized world during the Great War that had just passed, Frankl felt the younger generation of his day no longer had the kind of role models that would give them a sense of enthusiastic idealism. the energy that drives progress. The young people who had witnessed the war, he felt, had seen too much cruelty, pointless suffering, and devastating loss to harbor a positive outlook, let alone enthusiasm. The years leading up to and including the war, he noted, had utterly discredited all principles, leaving a nihilistic perception that the world itself lacked any substance. Frankl asked how it might be possible to resurrect and sustain concepts like a normal meaning in life, which had been so wantonly demolished by a torrent of lies. In another timely insight, Frankl saw that a materialistic view in which people end up mindlessly consuming and fixating on what they can buy next epitomizes a meaningless life, as he put it, where we are guzzling away without any thought of morality. That very eagerness for consumption has become today a dominant worldview, one devoid of any greater meaning or inner purpose. Add to that the degradation of human dignity created by an economic system that had, in the last few decades before Frankl gave his talks, relegated working men and women into mere means, degrading them into tools of making money for someone else. Frankl saw this as an insult to human dignity, arguing that a person should never become a means to an end. And then there were the concentration camps, where lives seen only as worthy of death were nevertheless exploited as slave labor to their biological limits. From all that, plus the simple fact of collusion with evil leaders, European countries especially were pervaded by a collective sense of guilt. On top of all this, Frankl was acutely aware, as a camp survivor, that the best among us did not return. That knowledge could easily turn into a crippling survivor's guilt. Some wonder camp survivors like him had to relearn how to be happy at all. From all these insults to reach any sense of meaning ensued an inner crisis, as Frankl sensed, one that led to the comfortless worldview of a nihilistic existentialism. Think Beckett's bleak post-war play, Waiting for Godot, an expression of the cynicism and hopelessness of these years. As Frankl put it, it should not be a surprise if contemporary philosophy perceives the world as though it has no substance. Fast forward 7 decades or more. These days, various lines of evidence suggest that many young people today are putting their sense of meaning and purpose first, a development Frankl could not have foreseen given the dark lens that the horrors he had just survived gave him. But these days, those who recruit and hire for companies, for instance, report that more than any time in memory, the new generation of prospective employees shun working for places whose activities conflict with their personal values. Frankl's intuitive sense of how purpose matters has been borne out by a large body of research. For instance, having a sense of purpose in life offers a buffer against poor health. People with a life purpose, data shows, tend to live longer. And researchers find that having a purpose numbers among the pillars of well-being. In Beckett's play, Estragon and Vladimir, the two characters waiting for Godot while trapped in a hopeless eternity, both make clumsy attempts at suicide to escape their senseless predicament. Frankl, in contrast, had founded a successful suicide prevention program in the decades before Nazis sent him to the death camps. And German colleagues of those days, there had been batches of suicides by young students after they received their scores on the exam that determined what further training they would or would not get. But suicide, Frankl argued, represents the height of meaninglessness. Suicide, he wrote, is never able to solve a problem or to answer the question being asked of us by life. Frankl urged that instead of fixating on and exaggerating the catastrophic life consequence of poor scores, students instead contemplate their larger aspirations for their lives. His program, some sources report, reduced those suicides to 0 in one of the first years it ran. Whoever has a why to live can bear almost any how. As the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche declared. Frankl takes this maxim as an explanation for the will to survive he noted in some fellow prisoners. Those who found a larger meaning and purpose in their lives, who had a dream of what they could contribute, were in Frankl's view more likely to survive than were those who gave up. One crucial fact mattered here. Despite the cruelty visited on prisoners by the guards, the beatings, torture, and constant threat of death, there was one part of their lives that remained free: their own minds. The hopes, imagination, and dreams of prisoners were up to them, despite their awful circumstances. This inner ability was real human freedom. People are prepared to starve, he saw, if starvation has a purpose or meaning. The lesson Frankl drew from this existential fact, or perspective on life's events, what we make of them matters as much or more than what actually befalls us. Fate is what happens to us beyond our control. But we each are responsible for how we relate to those events. Frankl held these insights on the singular importance of a sense of meaning even before he underwent the horrors of camp life. Though his years as a prisoner gave him even deeper conviction, when he was arrested and deported in 1941, he had sewn into the lining of his overcoat the manuscript of a book in which he argued for this view. He had hoped to publish that book one day, though he had to give up the coat and the unpublished book on his first day as a prisoner. And his desire to one day publish his views, along with his yearning to see his loved ones once again, gave him a personal purpose that helped keep him afloat. After the war, and with this optimistic outlook on living still intact despite the brutalities of the camps, Frankl in these lectures called on people to strive toward a new humanity, even in the face of their losses, heartbreaks, and disenchantments. What is human, he argued, is still valid. What is human is still valid. Frankl recounts asking his students what they thought gave a sense of purpose to his, Frankl's own life. One student guessed it exactly: to help other people find their purpose. Frankl ended these lectures and this book by saying his entire purpose has been that of any of us can say yes to life in spite of everything. Daniel Goleman, Boston, Winter, 2020.